Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast. I'm your host, Alexandra Stockwell. I'm a physician and an intimate marriage expert, and I specialize in showing couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships. I've been married for 25 years. My husband and I have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing relationship. If you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how. Now, let's dive in. And today, as we dive in, I think it's the first time since I launched the podcast, but we have one guest who's a man. Dr. Brent Lacey is a gastroenterologist who is passionate about helping physicians succeed with business and personal finances. He is totally phenomenal in all of his biography, which you can also look up in the show notes. But what isn't in his professional bio is the magnificent marriage and the beautiful family he has. And this is our first conversation, but I know it because it's evident right on his Facebook page. So we're going to start there after I say a warm welcome, Dr. Lacey.
Well, thanks, Alexandra, for having me. I'm super excited to be here. You're right. I talk mostly about business and money topics, but I mean, marriage is the ballgame. If you don't get that right, there's no point in having anything else. So I'm super excited to talk about this.
Okay, I love that you said that. And that is the kind of thing which actually people kind of throw around, that it's important to have a good marriage in order to have a good life. And there's certainly remarkable data about a good marriage making a big difference in business success. But I'd love to have you get more specific. Do you have either your own story or a physician or other person that you've helped with personal finances where the marriage really was the linchpin for the success?
Well, I'm going to flip that question around and say, can I come up with an example for which marriage was not the linchpin for success? I think that honestly, if you're in a good marriage, if you're in a healthy, loving relationship, then you just can't help but be successful other places. There's a natural spillover effect from having a beautiful, loving, emotionally thriving marriage, and seeing that spill over into your other relationships. I kind of think of it like you've got a stack of cups sitting on a table, and so if you've got your marriage very top, you've got 10 cups stacked in a pyramid. And if you're pouring constantly into that very top cup and only that one, or primarily that one, then you keep filling that, and eventually it fills to the brim and then bubbles over the surface and starts spilling into all the other cups below. And that's your work life and your friends and your family and your hobbies and your church and your neighborhood and your kids. And it just spills over into all those areas. So, but if you neglect that very top cup and you start filling in the other cups primarily, the only one that doesn't get filled is the marriage cup. So you really got to start there.
That's a really clear, inspiring image. Is that something that you knew all along, or is that something that you learned because you realized, oh, the other cups are full enough, but this one needs a little more nourishment?
Well, I have to say that I was very blessed growing up that I had parents that have just a phenomenal, thriving marriage that were a great example for me. And so I feel like I was blessed to have a very strong example of what a good and mutually beneficial marriage looks like. And so just finding ways to emulate that within the context of my personality, my wife's personality, which is certainly different from my parents, I think that was super helpful. So, and thankfully I was smart enough to pay attention. and so
good point.
And so I think that was really what started it for me. But my wife and I decided very early on, like when we were dating and we were engaged and doing our premarital counseling and into our first couple of years. I mean, we read marriage books. We did marriage Bible studies at our church. We talked to couples that had been married for 25, 30, 40 years and said, hey, you guys clearly have something that's working. We want that. What did you guys do to make that happen? And we just decided to work on it. We almost treated it like a little bit of a study project almost. I mean, that sounds a little bit unromantic perhaps, but I think, being very intentional about asking some real questions and diving into some of these deep conversations was really helpful for both of us to clarify what did we want, what did we need, and how can we best serve each other.
It really doesn't sound unromantic to me. Just this morning, I was coaching a couple that is relatively new in their relationship, and I was talking about how important it is to treat the marriage as a living organism, and what that ends up meaning is treating it as an area for research and development and play. Like, let's try this and see how it is for both of us, but make a point of reassessing and adjusting in a way that works best for everybody.
Okay, so I really love your concept of the marriage as a living organism. One of my favorite things to tell people, and I use this saying in business coaching and finance coaching, and certainly in marriage, I think it's absolutely true. And the saying goes like this: healthy things grow, and growing things change. And I think that's true of most living organisms, and I think that's really true of a marriage. And so as you are first, growing into a relationship with each other, you're changing in dramatic ways, especially early on, and learning how to take two lives and merge them into one is difficult, and it's hard, and it requires a lot of change. And you're constantly growing, you're constantly changing over time. It does get easier. But I think that idea of the living organism, that it has to be nurtured, it has to be constantly attended to, or you run the risk of it withering and dying on the vine, I think is a really apt one.
Yeah, and I love how you talk about it as well. I'm curious, is there something you learned from one of the couples that have been married a long time that you and your wife spoke to, when you were engaged, that you still think of? Is there any advice that you were given that you still benefit from?
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. One piece of advice I think was really good is that I got was from a gentleman. It was in our church when we were first married, which is now 15 years ago. And he said, no matter how old you get, you need to date your wife. I was like, well, what does that mean? He said, don't let things become routine. Some things are going to become more natural, more of a routine orientation, but don't let it become mundane. Don't let it become something that's just done by rote. Continue to, bring, give your wife gifts and say nice things to her and talk and speak well of her in public. And wives do the same for your husbands, but keep that spark alive through intentional acts of love. And maybe that looks like giving gifts. Maybe that's, spending quality time together, but find ways to constantly be in a state of renewing and nurturing that relationship like you were talking about.
Intentional acts of love. Wow. That is that summarizes it all. And since you really have expertise and experience working with physicians, other educated people, specifically in healthcare, on personal finance, do you end up inadvertently giving marital advice? Because personal finance, so most of the time, really is a joint venture with your spouse. Not always. I certainly coach couples who have they've been together for 15 years and still have completely separate finances, but I think more commonly they're blended.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So I would say that I don't give marital advice, but what I do observe very often is that when someone comes in and they think they have a money problem, what they really have is a relationship problem. And I focus on the money aspect of things and engineer some interactions and some conversations for the couple to have that ends up requiring them to address some of the marital issues too. So I sort of address it in a roundabout way, but by allowing them to come to those conversations themselves. So it's very interesting. I've had many people that I've coached over the years that will come in saying, listen, we just don't have a plan. We don't know where our money's going. We seem like we're always living paycheck to paycheck and can never quite get ahead and get progress on our goals. So can you help us out? And then we'll go through, we'll do a few sessions and we'll be working on stuff and they're making real progress. And then, they'll come back for second, third session or something. And I'll say, well, how's it going? How do you guys feel like things are going? They're like, well, you know what? We think that this finance coaching is really saving our marriage. And the first time that I was told that, I was like, what are you talking about? This isn't, if you're here for marital counseling, I am not your guy. And he's like, no, you don't understand. We've never sat down and had to have these conversations about money, about, when we just went through the budget and what we're going to spend money on, it forced us to directly address issues that we had been just putting off. And it really put us in a position where we just had to have some of those conversations. And now we're talking about them. We're communicating. We're finding ways to have these conversations without fighting and come to some kind of agreement. And it's revolutionized our marriage. It's an amazing thing to watch. And it's very common, I think, whether you're talking about, money issues or family issues or parenting issues or physical intimacy issues, the problem is usually not that issue. That is usually a symptom of a greater problem. And so what I always tell people is look, you just got to start coming together. Find something that you can agree on, find some foundation of success that you can build on, and maybe it's something really small, but start to have some of those conversations where you just are in existence together and you just take time to enjoy each other again. Forget about your problems and just start talking about stuff that has nothing to do with your problems. Start to enjoy each other again and then start to tackle some of these issues.
I really love hearing you speak about this because the data is very clear that the two biggest sources of conflict in marriage are money and sex. And so I think if one looks at it in a overly simplistic manner, it can look like, oh, we better fix the sex or we better fix the money, which is what people are coming in to do with you. But I really don't think either one of them is the cause. They are symptoms in just the way that you have outlined. And I wonder if is it very custom, or could you now share a question or something that you give a couple to work on, which when they do, it really opens up the communication and the collaboration for them?
So it tends to be fairly custom, but I can give you a couple of examples. So I'll give you an example from about a year ago. I had a couple coming in, and the husband was a physician and had an idea about wanting to send a certain amount of money to some family that lived in a foreign country. I think it was Indonesia. And it was really important to him to send what seemed like a fairly sizable amount of money back home to family. And his wife was very bothered by this. And, and then on the flip side, the wife had a series of expenditures that she had every month that were really important to her, that was really hard for the husband to get his head around as being something that was important. And so I just told him, okay, listen, instead of explaining what it is you want to do, explain why. What's the point? And so when I'm talking to the husband, I'm saying, look, you're talking about what, but your wife needs to know why. Why is it important? What is so important about sending this amount of money home to your family? And as he started to realize, okay, well, well, I just need to tell her what's going on instead of just saying, this is what I want to do. Well, why won't you let me? He started to open up about how, how important his family had been to him and how much they had sacrificed to get him to the United States. And now he's a successful dermatologist, and his family are living in relative poverty compared to them in Indonesia. And he felt a great sense of duty to his family to be able to support them, because now he's able, when they were supporting him when they had essentially nothing. Well, as soon as he started explaining that, you could tell he had never said that to his wife, and she just looked and her face just started melting. And she's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that was, it opened up this huge, huge dialogue between them that was just absolutely amazing. Another example would be, when couples are trying to decide, are they going to send their kids to public school or private school? A lot of people, those decisions run very deep, and they can go back to decisions that their parents made on what their schooling was going to be and how they felt in either public school or private school, and what opportunities it gave them, and whether they were bullied or whether it was a beneficial arrangement or whatever. And so a lot of times people are coming in with baggage that they just don't want to share. And most of the time it's just as a matter of getting people to tell the full story. And just instead of just saying, here's what I want to do, and then fighting about who's going to do what, talk about why. What's the why behind it? I think that's, if any of your listeners haven't read the book, Start With Why by Simon Sinek, it's a book I recommend to everybody. And, in the book, he talks about, most people talk a lot about why. Most everyone talks about what they want to do. Some people talk about how they want to do it, and almost nobody thinks about why. And so if you flip that on its head and say, well, why are we doing this? What's the point? What's the value? What is the motivation here? And help your spouse understand the heart behind some of these decisions, that can open up a huge range of communication. And so if you just let your guard down just a little bit, allow your spouse into your personal thoughts, you'd be amazed at how much the relationship can open up.
And one of the precursors to doing that is that you need to be clear why something is important to you. And in the case of the dermatologist with the family in Indonesia, that's something he was probably clear about all the way through. But a lot of the times motivations, more often, let's say with private school versus public school, or which kind of car to get, or which home to live in, there are the very obvious whys that are often unspoken. But there's so much richness in journaling or otherwise exploring, like, why do I want that? And that process can be very useful, as well as the sharing it with a spouse.
Well, and I think having the humility for your spouse to challenge you on it. And if you bring up an idea with them and say, hey, I want to do this, or this is something I've been thinking about, and they say, well, why? Or have you thought all the way through this? I understand you think this is a good idea, but have you considered how it's going to affect this and this and this? And instead of just saying, oh, he's trying to throw up roadblocks, she's trying to, quash my dreams, instead believe that your spouse has your best intentions at heart, and say, okay, this is someone I like and that I trust and who has my best interests in mind. And they think that I haven't thought this all the way through. Maybe I haven't. Maybe I need to be considering this more deeply than I have, and having that humility to be able to re-examine your own desires and your own beliefs in the context of what your spouse is bringing up to you, I think is very important as well.
And do you find that sometimes one spouse will share the why that they think the other spouse is going to approve of and appreciate, rather than their real why?
By the time that folks are coming to see me, they are usually pretty motivated to get the relationships on track. And I think I have a selection bias in this way, but I don't typically have that particular problem. But yes, that is absolutely a problem and can be incredibly destructive to relationships. And so if you're trying to find ways to manipulate your spouse into giving you an answer on something that you want, instead of allowing them the opportunity to challenge you in a way that may mean changing something that you had been super passionate about. I mean, that is the beginning of the end. Anytime that you are considering some kind of emotional or mental deception or evasion for the purposes of manipulation of your spouse, that is the beginning of the end of your relationship. Nothing but honesty and clarity is going to result in a long-term relationship.
Honesty, clarity, and humility. I think you've named all the essentials, and it's really fascinating to me to hear this because I'm really focused on the communication and the intimacy, and sometimes talk about finances with couples, but not so often. And everything you're saying just rings so true and resonant with my own experience, which is part of the context for why I wanted to bring you on prior to the summit that you're hosting, where I believe you're going to be addressing the issues we've been talking about from all of these different perspectives and some others as well. Would you talk about that?
Yeah, it's really exciting. So November 15th to 17th, we're hosting an online digital summit that's completely free. It's called Marriage and Money MD. And it's geared primarily towards healthcare professionals because we have mostly physicians and dentists that are speaking, but the principles are broadly applicable. So there'll be lots of great talks on investing and how to put together a financial plan, how to have conversations about money without fighting. And then, lots of great marriage topics like communication and parenting and physical intimacy and, how to merge two families together, how to blend your dreams into one shared vision for your family. I mean, I'm just so excited. It's going to be a really great time. And if people want to register for free, the website is marriageandmoneymd.com. And so you can go on there, you can register. Like I said, it's completely free. And if you can't catch it live, the replays will be available for the whole week. So you can definitely go back and catch the replays on your commute or while you're working out or something.
Yeah, and we'll also have that link in the show notes. And I want to emphasize that Marriage and Money MD, you do not need to be an MD to get benefit. If you're an MD, please sign up. But I find in my work that while there are very specific, unique challenges and opportunities for physicians when it comes to marriage and money, anyone who's highly educated has their version of the same kinds of issues. So do take advantage. It really sounds amazing. And I'd love to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests because I believe that marriage is the ultimate vehicle for personal growth. And while we haven't particularly spoken about your wife that much, other than it's clear she's a beautiful collaborator with you, I'd like to ask you, Brent, what have you learned about yourself as a result of specifically being married to your wife?
I have learned that I am uniquely vulnerable to critiques. And while I've always been, I think, a very coachable person, it's very hard for me to feel like I've disappointed anybody. And so, especially if it's someone that I really like and I really care about or whose opinion I really respect. And so, man, if I ever have even the slightest inkling that I've, done anything that would be a disappointment to Catherine, it's just an absolutely devastating feeling. So, and that's not on her, that's on, that's on me. She's a lot to live up to. She's amazing. And so it's difficult when you're striving for perfection, feeling like you're falling short. And thankfully, one of her spiritual gifts is mercy, and so she is, I think, really, she is a great encourager. She's my greatest cheerleader. She's a phenomenal encourager, and so I think knowing that she's always in my corner is is really valuable. And so then when we're having a conversation and, if we're challenging each other on something, then I know that no matter what, she loves me, and she wants nothing but the best for me and for us and for our kids. And that's an incredibly secure place to be. And so, I don't think I could overstate how freeing that is and how valuable that is to me, to have that level of security and just knowing that no matter what, she's always in my corner.
Amazing. And what you've articulated as the thing you've learned about yourself, that is more or less a universal phenomenon. And I think both men and women typically don't appreciate it that much, how real that is. And it sounds like you know this about yourself, and you've really found the way to thrive and feel the love Catherine has for you. Do you have any words of wisdom for a husband listening who really recognizes what that's like, to the devastation of feeling like he's disappointed his wife? What's the next place where he could put his attention to really work that through?
The next place to put your attention is always back to your wife. And so if you are, don't allow yourself to wallow in those kinds of feelings. You've got to confront them in yourself, and you've got to bring them up to your wife. And you got to say, listen, honey, I'm feeling really down about myself. I feel like I've just really let you down. And if there's anything I need to do better or differently, I want to know, because I want to do better. Most of the time, what you'll find is that it's not as catastrophic a situation as you've made it out to be in your mind. And so, but don't allow yourself to harbor those kinds of feelings without saying them out loud. They will tend to fester and grow, and they turn into bitterness and resentment, and you start projecting your own insecurities on your spouse, and they have no idea what's going on. And so you just are constantly in a state of thinking, oh, well, they just, she thinks I'm terrible, and he thinks I'm messing up again. And all the while, they have utterly no idea what's going on. So don't leave those kinds of things unspoken. Have those conversations, even if it's awkward, even if it's kind of challenging or painful. Do not allow those kinds of feelings to fester.
Well, I appreciate the whole spectrum of what you've shared, both things you've articulated and things that we can infer because of what you've articulated. So I'm really grateful you've come on the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I love the work you're doing with this. I think it's really important.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Intimate Marriage Podcast. For more information about Alexandra, her book, and her coaching services, go to theintimatemarriagepodcast.com.